Crowns, fake bloodlines, invented kingdoms, and an amazing number of people who walked into history yelling, "Yes, that throne is basically mine now." In this video, we are meeting the wildest royal imposters ever, from smooth social climbers to absolute maniacs who nearly fooled entire nations. Some wanted luxury, some wanted power. All of them had absurd levels of nerve. 1. James. Jesse. Strang did not look at a religious leadership crisis and think, maybe I should help steady the ship. No, he looked at the chaos after Joseph Smith's death and thought, this situation clearly needs a crown. He claimed divine authority, gathered followers, took them to Beaver Island in Lake Michigan, and in 1850 staged a full coronation with robes, a scepter, and enough theatrical ambition to make it feel like a monarchy built out of nerve and curtain fabric. And somehow, for a while, it worked. He held real power, ran the community, and made everyone around him deeply uncomfortable. The perfect detail is that his crown was made of tin, not gold, which is honestly beautiful. A bargain bin kingdom for a man running entirely on confidence. History keeps teaching the same lesson. Speak grandly enough, and most people stop checking the materials. 2. Emelian Pugachev was not some polished palace fraud in silk, pretending to be important over dessert. He was a rough Don Cossack who claimed he was Peter III, the dead husband of Catherine the Great, and then used that lie to light one of the most violent uprisings Russia had ever seen. By calling himself the true Czar returned, he gave peasants, workers, Cossacks, and every other furious soul in the empire a stolen banner big enough to gather rage under. This was not a cute royal scam. Towns burned, blood flowed, and the state suddenly had to face how much misery it had been sitting on. Catherine crushed him and had him executed, yes, but not before he exposed the empire's social rot in the loudest way possible. Fake identity, real panic, absolutely catastrophic review of Russian management. 3. The dreadnought hoax worked because very serious institutions are often hilariously easy to fool when they are desperate to look impressive. In 1910, Horace de Vere Cole and his friends, including Virginia Woolf, disguised themselves as Abyssinian royalty with robes, turbans, fake beards, dark makeup, and the kind of reckless confidence usually found in actors and people who should absolutely not be encouraged. Then, they talked their way onto HMS Dreadnought, pride of the Royal Navy. Instead of being thrown out immediately, they were welcomed with full ceremony and given a special tour. Their language was basically nonsense, and they kept blurting out things like bunga bunga, as if that passed for diplomatic admiration. And somehow it did. British authorities saw costumes, heard mysterious sounds, and immediately entered respectful imperial host mode. Sometimes power is not defeated by enemies. Sometimes it is defeated by 6 idiots with facial hair glue. 4. Anthony Gignac understood one very profitable truth. If you arrive in luxury cars, wear enough designer labels, and act just insulted enough in fancy hotels, people start assuming you are important before they ever consider that you might be lying through your teeth. Born in Colombia and raised in the United States, he spent years posing as Prince Khalid bin Al Saud, a Saudi royal with bottomless wealth and mysterious influence. And he committed to the bit hard. We are talking fake diplomatic plates, bodyguards, mansions, watches, elite parties, and investors eager to hand over real money just to stand near the sparkle. What finally cracked the fantasy was not some brilliant detective trap. It was simple suspicion during a deal, and the gloriously awkward detail that this supposed Saudi prince ordered pork. Imagine building a fake monarchy for decades and getting taken down by bacon. 5. Aurélie Antoine de Tournan's lives in that weird historical zone where fraud, fantasy, and colonial absurdity all shake hands and decide to become a political project. He was a French lawyer who went to South America, involved himself in Mapuche resistance, and then calmly declared the kingdom of Araucania and Patagonia with himself as king, because apparently crossing an ocean and appointing yourself frontier royalty sounded reasonable in his head. Chilean authorities were not impressed and eventually arrested and expelled him, which, for once, was a very fair response to a random European showing up with monarchy plans. The reason the story still sticks is that some Mapuche leaders did see him as a potentially useful ally against Chilean expansion, which gave the fantasy a little real political oxygen. It was still wildly ridiculous. A provincial lawyer basically tried to conquer reality with paperwork, nerve, and a crown no one asked for. 6. William Henry Ellis understood American racism so clearly that he turned it into a cruel little experiment dressed in good clothes. Born in Texas to formerly enslaved parents, he knew exactly how segregation worked. A black man could be insulted, blocked, and shoved aside. But a mysterious foreign prince in elegant clothing might suddenly be welcomed through the front door with a smile. Ellis reinvented himself in business and society, moving through elite spaces under the aura of exotic status in ways his real identity would never have been allowed to do. And that is what makes the whole thing so devastating. The same society that rejected him became polite and eager the moment it thought he came wrapped in royal mystery from abroad. It was not just deception. It was a public demonstration that segregation depended as much on performance and paperwork as on prejudice. America saw the costume and immediately forgot its own rules. 7. Michael Romanoff turned fake nobility into one of Hollywood's smoothest personal brands, which makes perfect sense in a city where reinvention is practically a utility service. Born nowhere near the actual Romanov family and once known as Harry Gergeson, he remade himself as Prince Michael Romanov and wore the title with such confidence that it became part of his social charm. By the time he was running his famous Beverly Hills restaurant, the truth was already floating around, but nobody important seemed eager to ruin the glamorous version. Stars packed the place, celebrities loved him, and his fake imperial glow became part of the atmosphere. That is the genius of Romanov. He did not bury the lie under panic. He made the performance more entertaining than the truth, which is basically Hollywood's favorite moral system. If the fake prince gets you a table near Humphrey Bogart, nobody suddenly becomes a genealogist. 8. Boris Skosarev took one look at Andorra, noticed it was tiny, politically awkward, and slightly confused, and apparently decided that meant it was available. In 1934, this Russian-born adventurer swept into the principality with grand ideas, self-invented status, and the impossible confidence of a man who had clearly never once been bullied by reality. He declared himself King Boris I, offered reform plans, charmed some locals, and briefly turned Andorra into something between a constitutional crisis and a deluxe practical joke. The wild part is that anyone entertained him at all. For a short moment, this self-manufactured monarch got to act like a real king in a real place. Then reality finally remembered where it had left its boots. His reign lasted only a few days before Spanish authorities arrested him, which makes the whole episode feel less like the collapse of a kingdom and more like venue security shutting down an overcommitted amateur production. 9. Stefano Cernetic pulled off the modern royal scam with the serene confidence of a man who knew that medals, titles, and a straight face still work shockingly well on people in expensive rooms. He presented himself as a hereditary prince of Montenegro and Macedonia, floated through elite events, enjoyed luxury treatment, and padded the whole show with forged documents, fake institutions, invented chivalric orders, and so much ceremony that nobody wanted to ask the obvious question out loud. His performance fooled officials, celebrities, and every status-hungry person who wanted the fairy tale to be real because it looked rich enough. At one point, he even honored Pamela Anderson with a made-up royal order from his imaginary universe. Eventually, authorities stepped in and called the paperwork fake and the titles nonsense. In simpler terms, he was running a deluxe monarchy powered by printer ink, audacity, and society's embarrassing weakness for velvet. 10. Karl Wilhelm Naundorf looked at one of Europe's saddest royal mysteries and decided there was room for him inside it, which is a deeply ambitious hobby for a German clockmaker. He claimed to be Louis XVII, the dead son of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and managed to convince some people that he might really be the lost Dauphin back from history's most dramatic disappearance. Plenty of others tried similar claims, but Naundorf lasted because he delivered intimate-sounding details and emotional certainty that landed well with royalists already eager to believe. Some former courtiers accepted him, others were horrified. His French was weak, which is not ideal when you are claiming to be the missing Prince of France, but apparently conviction sometimes does the heavy lifting grammar refuses to do. Europe has always loved tragic princes and impossible returns. Naundorf showed up carrying both, and hoped nobody listened too carefully to the accent. 11. False Dmitry III existed because 17th century Russia had apparently decided that after two fake Dmitries, the obvious next step was a trilogy. By then, the country was drowning in war, factional chaos, foreign intervention, dynastic paranoia, and enough rumor to keep a whole empire drunk on nonsense. Into that mess stepped yet another man claiming to be the long-dead Tsarevich Dmitry. This third edition, often identified as a deacon named Sidorka, appeared in 1611 and picked up support among Cossacks and others around Pskov. He even earned the nickname the Thief of Pskov, which is not exactly majestic, but still impressive branding for a man impersonating someone who had already died multiple times in public imagination. The strangest part is that enough people still treated him seriously for him to matter. At some point, the liar stops being the weird part. The audience becomes the real historical mystery. 12. False Dmitry I was not some harmless poser milking nobles for a few dinners and a better coat. He actually became Tsar of Russia, which is the sort of promotion most con artists only achieve in fever dreams. During the time of troubles, Russia was unstable, frightened, divided, and emotionally available to almost anything wearing royal packaging. So he claimed to be Dmitry, the supposedly dead son of Ivan the Terrible, and against all logic, the story landed. He entered Moscow with support, took the throne, and ruled for roughly a year. Then came the crash. He was overthrown and killed in 1606. His body was mutilated, burned, and the ashes were reportedly fired from a cannon toward Poland, which is not so much a funeral as a full geopolitical meltdown with pyrotechnics. Russia did not merely reject him. Russia staged the angriest exit package imaginable. 13. Pseudo-Alexios II used one of the oldest tricks in imperial politics. Walk in, announce that the dead ruler is actually alive, and ask for the throne back like you are collecting a coat from the front desk. Alexios II had truly been murdered in 1183, which should have made impersonating him a difficult sell. But this pretender had timing, resemblance, and the enormous advantage of operating inside Byzantium, where political stability was less a condition and more a myth people repeated for comfort. He found supporters and even got military backing from the Seljuk Sultan because foreign powers adore a royal identity crisis if it arrives with strategic benefits. That is the truly absurd part. He did not need everyone to believe him. He only needed one powerful ruler to decide the lie was useful enough to attach soldiers to. Suddenly, the dead emperor was back on the market with an army included. 14. Anna Anderson became the most famous royal impostor of the modern era because she stepped into the one role Europe never stopped hoping might somehow be real: the miraculously surviving princess. Claiming to be Anastasia Romanov, daughter of Nicholas II, she convinced a surprising number of aristocrats, sympathizers, and determined believers that she had escaped the execution of the imperial family. The Romanov story was already drowning in grief, nostalgia, mystery, and the kind of sorrow that makes people cling to impossible endings like lifeboats. Anderson did not just tell a lie. She moved into a wound and furnished it nicely. Lawsuits dragged on for years. Supporters defended her fiercely, critics pushed back just as hard, and the argument became one of those exhausting historical heirlooms nobody wants, but everyone inherits. Then science arrived and ruined the melodrama. DNA proved Anastasia died with her family and Anderson was not a Romanov. Fairy tales really hate laboratories. 15. Princess Caribou was Regency England, getting catfished by posture, gibberish, and the raw power of committed performance. Mary Baker, daughter of a modest English family, appeared speaking nonsense, wearing unusual clothing, and behaving like an exotic royal from the distant island of Javasu, which she had very conveniently invented herself. The local elite responded exactly as you would expect from people who desperately wanted a thrilling dinner table story. They accepted the fantasy, dressed it up, and practically helped her build it. Soon she was receiving fine treatment, fascination, hospitality, and all the attention polite society loves to pour onto anything mysterious, foreign, and apparently expensive. The scam worked because upper-class England badly wanted to be entertained by something exotic without doing the exhausting work of skepticism. It collapsed only when someone recognized her from ordinary life. Not empire, not scholarship, just somebody from the neighborhood, which feels wonderfully appropriate. 16. The tale of Prince Shervashidze belongs to that slippery world of émigré aristocratic nonsense where one elegant surname, one collapsed old order, and one wealthy audience with weak judgment can create an entirely fake destiny. Presenting himself in the United States as exiled Georgian royalty from a fallen world, he moved through the sort of social atmosphere where money finds titles irresistible and titles return the affection immediately. It was the perfect setting for a tragic continental prince with refined manners and a carefully staged backstory. According to the story, he married into wealth and lived comfortably inside this glamorous fiction until official records eventually arrived with the kind of dull truth that destroys these performances every single time. Suddenly, the romantic prince looked much less legendary and much more administrative. Even when the decorative details shift from retelling to retelling, the core absurdity remains strong. Say one aristocratic name with enough confidence, and society will throw itself at a man it would otherwise ignore standing in line somewhere. 17. Alexander Bolus proves that in the ancient world, royal blood was sometimes less a biological fact, and more a political negotiation held by men with armies and useful timing. He emerged from fairly obscure beginnings but claimed to be the son of a former Seleucid king, which was a very convenient family history for someone trying to occupy a throne. More importantly, powerful neighbors found his story useful and backed him, and that changed everything. Because once enough soldiers, diplomats, and ambitious elites agree that your ancestry is plausible enough for current needs, your family tree starts getting treated like sacred truth. Bolus was not some tiny pretender who vanished after one failed speech either. He actually ruled for several years before eventually falling. That is a solid run for a man whose entire royal pitch was basically, "Trust me, my father was king. And no, I will not be taking questions about documentation at this time." 18. Emperor Norton did not inherit a throne, conquer one, or produce a shred of legal justification for one. He simply announced himself emperor, and San Francisco, being magnificently strange, decided that sounded more charming than arguing. After financial ruin, Joshua Norton declared himself Emperor of the United States in 1859, and later added Protector of Mexico, because when you are inventing titles, there is absolutely no reason to show restraint. What makes the story special is not the claim itself. It is how the city responded. Newspapers printed his proclamations, businesses honored him, and ordinary people treated him like a beloved civic landmark in uniform for more than 20 years. He was not really a predatory fraud at all. He was more like a public agreement that life becomes richer when one harmless man is allowed to cosplay national authority full-time. Compared with some real rulers, a local emperor issuing dramatic opinions on policy almost sounds refreshingly efficient. 19. Marco Tullio Carrizzoni plugged himself into one of Portugal's strangest emotional habits, which was the refusal to accept that King Sebastian had died in Morocco in 1578 and was not going to return on horseback like history's most dramatic encore. After Sebastian vanished, rumors spread that he had survived and would come back, because apparently entire nations can stay stuck in denial for decades. Into that atmosphere walked Marco Tullio, an Italian adventurer who inserted himself into the false Sebastian tradition and presented himself as the lost king restored. On paper, the claim was absurd. In practice, it found believers because Sebastianism had become part prophecy, part politics, and part national coping disorder. Authorities eventually crushed him, and he died for the fraud in 1603. But the truly amazing part is that a foreign pretender with the wrong origins and the wrong language could still tap into Portugal's royal grief and make the fantasy function. When a country wants a miracle badly enough, even a bad actor gets a callback. 20. False Margaret of Norway proved that medieval Europe was perfectly capable of believing nonsense so long as it arrived wrapped in dynastic sorrow and spoken with confidence. The real Margaret, known as the Maid of Norway, died in 1290 as a child while traveling to Scotland, where she was meant to become queen. About 10 years later, a woman appeared in Bergen claiming she was Margaret and had somehow survived. There was just one tiny problem, and by tiny I mean visible from across the room. She seemed around 40, while the real Margaret would have been about 17. So this was less long-lost queen returns and more someone's aunt accidentally starting a constitutional crisis. And yet, she still found supporters among townspeople and clergy. That is the maddening part. Authorities executed her for treason in 1301, but the fact that she got that far tells you everything about the power of royal grief and public fantasy. Sometimes history really does treat arithmetic like a suggestion. 21. The pseudo-Baldwin affair exploded because medieval Europe had an almost supernatural inability to treat the return of dead rulers as a warning sign. Baldwin IX of Flanders, who had also ruled in Constantinople, disappeared after battle, and years later a rough, hermit-like figure appeared claiming he was the long-lost ruler back at last. In a more practical age, this would have ended after a few pointed questions and a brisk escort to the gate. Instead, it triggered a serious political crisis. Supporters gathered, towns hesitated, rulers panicked, and the mere possibility that he might be genuine was enough to unsettle an entire region. That is the sneaky power of royal imposture. You do not need universal belief. You just need enough uncertainty to make everyone else sweat through their clothes. He was eventually exposed and executed, but not before proving that one scruffy claimant with the right story could make medieval politics completely lose its grip. 22. Stephen the Little might be the most effective fraud on this list because he did not just enjoy fake prestige. He actually ruled, and rather inconveniently for anyone who likes simple moral lessons. He was not awful at it. Appearing in Montenegro in the 1860s, this obscure man somehow persuaded huge numbers of people that he was Peter III of Russia, despite the rather inconvenient reality that Peter had definitely died years earlier. But Montenegro was politically fractured, wary of outside power, and very open to a strong symbolic ruler, so the story landed. Once in charge, Stephen imposed order, strengthened authority, and governed with enough practical success to irritate his critics even more. That is what makes the story so bizarre. His identity was fake, but the administrative results were real enough to count. He only fell when assassins finally killed him. Apparently, even a counterfeit czar can outperform a lot of genuine governments, which is not a deeply comforting historical lesson. 23. Lambert Simnel was about 10 years old, which is normally the age for losing teeth and bothering adults, not leading a dynastic threat to the English crown. But the adults around him saw opportunity and turned him into a fake Plantagenet claimant, because English politics at the time had all the calm dignity of a wasp trapped in a goblet. Guided by the priest Richard Simons, Simnel was first assigned one noble identity and then upgraded into the much more explosive role of Edward, living symbol of Yorkist hopes. This was not some village prank on gullible locals. He was crowned in Dublin in 1487, in a formal ceremony while powerful factions used him as a human prop in a serious challenge to Henry VII. After the rebellion failed, Henry responded with brutal practicality. He did not execute the boy. He put him to work in the royal kitchens. From crowned claimant to dish duty is a savage career correction. 24. Terentius Maximus took advantage of one of Rome's stranger recurring fixations, which was the stubborn rumor that Emperor Nero had not really died and might return one day like a deeply inconvenient sequel. After Nero's death, enough people remained fascinated, disturbed, or weirdly nostalgic that a convincing impersonator still had room to operate. Terentius had the face, played the liar like Nero, and understood a crucial rule of imitation. Do not copy the man halfway when you can perform the entire brand. He gathered followers, fled east, and even persuaded the Parthians, Rome's great rival, that supporting him might be a wonderfully irritating way to destabilize the empire. That is fraud at a very serious level. He was not just tricking drunks in a market. He became useful enough to enter foreign policy calculations. Eventually, the act collapsed and he was killed. But for a moment, a dead emperor's tribute act nearly became regional strategy. 25. Auto vita is what happens when history drinks too much, wanders into a circus tent, and starts inventing monarchy. He was a German performer who later claimed that in 1913, he reached Albania before the real prince, exploited a physical resemblance, got himself crowned, enjoyed palace luxury, declared war on Montenegro for no sensible reason at all, grabbed part of the treasury, and escaped after 5 triumphant days. Historians, quite understandably, are skeptical. The whole thing may have been one giant self-created tall tale with extra seasoning, but honestly, that almost improves it. He told the story so boldly and so shamelessly that people remembered him for the rest of his life as the fake king of Albania. That is the beauty of a well-delivered lie. Some people leave behind monuments. Otto left behind a rumor wearing a crown and somehow made it stick. 26. Marie-Charles David de Marina went to Southeast Asia and did what only a very specific kind of overconfident European adventurer would try. He promoted himself into kingship and then tried to turn the whole fantasy into a business model. In the highlands of what is now Vietnam, he declared himself King Marie I of Sedong, surrounded himself with flags, decrees, royal symbols, and enough ceremonial decoration to wallpaper a small delusion into sovereignty. Then he tried selling the performance back to Europe like it was a luxury export. He issued decorations, offered noble titles, and marketed his imaginary monarchy to wealthy people in Paris, who apparently had too much cash and far too little skepticism. The entire episode feels like colonial vanity fused with elite shopping addiction. He was not satisfied with being a fake king in the jungle. He wanted brand extensions, premium tiers, and apparently a full royal subscription package. 27. Gregor. MacGregor did not stop at pretending to be important. He basically invented a whole country, which is the kind of ambition that makes ordinary liars look like toddlers sneaking biscuits. This Scottish soldier, fueled by absurd confidence and almost no shame, promoted a fictional Central American state called Portuguese, as if it were a thriving nation filled with roads, government, opportunity, and civilized promise. He styled himself its cacique, effectively giving himself a princely title with tropical branding, then sold land, printed official-looking documents, issued bonds, and convinced investors and settlers that this paradise was real. It was not real. The territory existed, but the country he described was fantasy dressed as paperwork. People sailed there expecting prosperity and found wilderness, disease, hardship, and death instead. That is what makes MacGregor so monstrous. He turned fake royalty into a colonial sales pitch and let other people pay for the joke with their lives. 28. False Dmitri II pulled off something that should have collapsed instantly under the weight of basic memory. He claimed to be the same Dmitri who had already died, been mutilated, burned, and had his ashes fired from a cannon, which feels like a pretty strong indication that the role was no longer open. And yet, during Russia's time of troubles, this new pretender still gathered followers because apparently even spectacular death was not enough to kill a useful royal rumor. He built a serious base of support, set up a rival court at Tuscino, and became important enough that nobles, officials, and foreign powers treated him as a real factor. At that point, the biggest joke is no longer the liar. It is the political system around him. Russia was so fractured, so desperate, and so opportunistic that a sequel starring an already dead protagonist still got financed. History usually hates recycled plots. Russia ordered another season. 29. Harry de Mila was poor, clever, and blessed with the incredibly useful instinct of noticing when other people had already started his scam for him. In Weimar, Germany, he ended up in a luxury hotel, and through a perfect collision of misunderstanding, class obsession, and upper-class imagination, people began treating him like disguised nobility. Most people would panic and correct the mistake. De Mela essentially decided that if society wanted to hallucinate a prince, it would be impolite to interrupt. He drifted through one aristocratic identity after another, enjoying elegant hospitality, fine treatment, and the sort of attention reserved for men with inherited silverware and too many family names. The brilliance of the act was that He let elites flatter themselves into believing they had recognized hidden greatness. He was eventually exposed not because the rich suddenly became skeptical, but because he later wrote about how easily he fooled them. That is not just a con, that is a published post-game analysis. 30. Perkin Warbeck was not merely another drifter claiming to be a missing royal for free meals and attention. He became a serious, international nuisance because he inserted himself into one of England's greatest dynastic mysteries and then managed to make foreign rulers care. Claiming to be Richard of Shrewsbury, one of the vanished princes in the Tower, he handed Henry VII's enemies a beautifully dramatic tool for destabilizing England. Margaret of Burgundy backed him, foreign courts received him, and actual military efforts were launched in his name. That is far beyond the level of a clever social fraud. Warbeck became a geopolitical instrument wrapped in princely tragedy and expensive ambition. The frightening part is that his claim was plausible enough, or simply useful enough, that serious people treated him as an option. Once kings abroad start investing in your fake identity, you are no longer just lying. You are basically running an international startup with cavalry. 31. Sarah Wilson started out as a convicted thief, transported to America, and somehow reinvented herself as Princess Susanna Carolina, supposedly the sister of Queen Charlotte, which is one of the most outrageous social upgrades in history. After escaping servitude, she acquired elegant clothes, polished her manners, and moved through colonial society as if she had spent her childhood giving orders to servants instead of being sentenced by a court. Wealthy households welcomed her, flattered her, and showered her with gifts and hospitality because rich people are often dangerously vulnerable to anyone who promises even indirect access to greater power. She hinted at influence, offices, and royal favor as if she carried half the British Empire in her handbag. The trick worked because status is theater, and colonial elites desperately wanted front-row seats. Say everything with poise, and just a touch of offended dignity, and suddenly nobody asks for evidence. She milked vanity and snobbery like a professional. 32. George Salmanazar understood one very profitable fact about early 18th century Europe. If you arrive claiming to be an exotic prince and say it all with enough confidence, a shocking number of educated people will happily switch off their brains and ask for more. He appeared in Britain pretending to be from Formosa, meaning Taiwan, and then invented an entire culture with the commitment of a man doing speedrun anthropology with absolutely no shame. He described strange rituals, bizarre customs, a fake alphabet, and even a made-up language, then fed audiences sensational stories about blood drinking and grotesque ceremonies because apparently plain lying was too modest for him. For a while, respectable people listened as if he were a walking encyclopedia from another world. Then reality spoiled the show. Better information contradicted him, and scholars noticed his supposed native language looked suspiciously like Latin homework wearing a tropical costume. Nothing says mysterious foreign prince quite like academic cheating energy. So who was the most dangerous fraud here? Who was the funniest? And who did we absolutely snub from this list? Do not play nice in the comments. I want your most ruthless picks. If one of these imposters secretly deserved the crown more than the real royals, say that too. And if you want more bizarre history with zero dignity left intact, hit like and subscribe.